was talking about the kind of things he's seen on the front line.
Francisco said that he had a really important and exciting story about a young Nigerian in the north of Nigeria who was thinking of probably seeking his fortune in Abuja or Lagos, but as a result of the responsible behavior of a private company, of a private sector organization, he got what he needed, his tools, the bike, and he stayed in the north, and hopefully he's going to catalyze some responsible and excellent energy in the north, and he will find or even become an employer, you know, and play a part in food systems transformation, particularly in times of multiple crises. That's what we're going to talk about in earnest over the next 90 minutes or so. Let's remember the GDPRD Thematic Working Group on Rural Youth Employment, formed initially following the AGA 4 years ago, that focused on rural youth. Okay, so in this session, we're going to look at implications of crisis and conflict on a sustainable and more just transformation of food systems, okay? We're going to have a panel discussion, we'll have a Q&A, a role of different stakeholders, and some feedback at the end. We've got it in two parts. First of all, the transformation in times of crisis and conflict, and then the panel discussion. And we've got 6 speakers. Let me introduce them. 3 of them are here, 3 of them online. Here, Lauren Phillips, Deputy Director, Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality, and she's from FAO. Lauren, please come up on stage. You can give her a round of applause if you like, Lauren. We have Molly Brennan, Lead Consultant, Coalition of Action on Decent Work and Living Incomes and Wages for All Food Systems Workers. And she's from IFAD. Molly Brennan, where are you? Please come forward. And the third of our in-house participants, Olawale Rotimi Opeyemi, founder and CEO of JR Farms Limited, Rwanda. You might think he is a Yoruba from Nigeria with that name, but he's now become a Rwandan. Mr. Kagame says it's fantastic. We have Elvis Bayutarev, Rural Economy Specialist from the International Labour Organization. Elvis will join us online. And you can applaud Elvis if you want. And we have Kennedy Mukulai Ayason, Policy Officer, the Rural Development Division of the African Union Commission's Department of Agriculture, Rural Development and Blue Economy and Sustainable Development. Kennedy, thank you for joining us online.
Thank you.
And Tumebazi Kamutima, CEO of Yofchan, Young Farmers Champions Network, Uganda. Yeah, I met you before online. Good to see you again. Fantastic. Please, everybody, let's get going. Right. So let's set the scene, first of all, with an initial keynote. And I'm pleased to say we've got Lauren Phillips. So Lauren is with FAO, focusing on inclusive rural transformation and gender equality. And I've got a couple of questions for you, really. You can answer them from a seated position if you choose. Why is rural youth employment more important than ever? And what's changed as a result of the ongoing crises? Okay, we're now at the tail of COVID, although it may have a very long tail. We don't know what's going to come after Omicron. And of course, we've got the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. What's changed as a result of these two? And how do we address the current disruptions of the value chains?
So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, colleagues all over the world. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to be back at IFAD. I worked at IFAD until December, so it's nice to see familiar faces and friends as well. I'm really happy to be here today because this is a very important topic. We know, of course, that rural youth are playing a major role in the transformation of agri-food systems globally. And so I'm going to try to answer your questions, but perhaps in a slightly roundabout way.
Yeah, that's all right.
So let me just start by saying that, we know the statistics. Most of us who work in rural development are aware of the large numbers of young people in developing regions and their critical importance to transforming agri-food systems. So globally, right, youth are around 15.5% of the population. which doesn't sound like a lot, but 84% of those young people are in developing countries, right? And a huge percentage of the young people that are in Africa and Asia are working or will be seeking jobs in the sector, in the agri-food sector, which means that it's, of course, of critical importance to ensure that they're participants in processes of rural development and that they have opportunities. So just a little bit more on statistics. So, young people are often categorized as working poor. 70% of young people in sub-Saharan Africa are working poor. They start working often in the informal economy. They receive very low wages and remuneration. And this is not out of choice, of course, but this is the sort of conditions in which they find themselves inserted in job markets. Additionally, they're 3 times more likely than adults to be unemployed. And many of them are neither in employment nor in education or training. So this is the famous sort of NEET category, right? Around a fifth of young people globally are in these conditions where they're not able to fully participate in either job markets, training, or education. So I think that helps to answer your first question, Henry, about, why is this topic more important than ever? We need to sort of work to ensure that young people can participate in training opportunities in the workplace, on farms or off farms, right? Especially given, and this is to your second question, the sort of strong vulnerabilities that young people can face in pursuing their livelihoods. So the COVID-19 pandemic has had a major impact on the possibilities for participation in labor markets and value chains. But also, of course, the food price instability that we're experiencing globally due to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and a variety of natural disasters, climate-related shocks, and other kinds of economic disasters make the conditions for young people's insertion into job markets and training even more complex. We know that young people face specific constraints in terms of their access to land, in particular, in terms of their ability to utilize natural resources, in terms of their access to finance. They often don't have collateral that can help them leverage their business ideas when they want to pursue entrepreneurial ideas, technology, knowledge, and information. So there's all of these gaps, right, which make the policy process less hospitable somehow to youth possibilities and employment. And I think that that's sort of a critical thing to keep in mind, that these crises that we're discussing are coupled upon already some structural challenges that young people face when they're trying to participate in agri-food systems. So what should we do about that? I think one of the really important things that we are trying to do as international institutions, but also, as you can see from the participants in this session, is genuinely encourage and support the participation of young people in policy processes and in governance mechanisms. So this is not just sort of like making sure there are young people scattered amongst, sort of representative participation. Yeah, but genuinely ensuring that there is a deep participation and that young people are included in the design of interventions, that their needs, interests are catered to, and that they themselves become agents of change, right? I think in the Food System Summit process, there were at least 68 food system dialogues that were focused on young people. Young people participated in many of these processes and identified, right, what some of their needs were. And I assume that as the coalitions work with nations to implement the pathways that came out of the Food System Summit, the young people will have a very sort of key role in implementing the recommendations that they made in terms of empowerment, having a seat at the table, closing the skills gap and the employment gaps, supporting access to assets and finance, and peer-to-peer learning and other ways of sort of increasing access to information and training. So just to finish, right, and then I'll pass back to you. I think that, we know that as we move forward, there's a need to have a diversification of skill sets, that young people participate in organization, and those organizations need strengthening, capacity building, that there are new demands in the agri-food system workplace, which technology can help to bridge. And that without including youth, we won't be able to achieve our objectives around transforming food systems, agri-food systems. So FAO has a lot to say about a portfolio of projects and initiatives on youth employment. I know that the other agencies and bilateral institutions represented here are also doing very good work, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you the kinds of things that you believe will be successful in managing some of the challenges that I just discussed. Thank you so much, Henry.
Lauren, thank you very much indeed. That was very lean and fit. Thank you very much. You've given us a bit of time to work with. Does anybody have any initial response to what Lauren has said? Because we've got a little bit of time to get one or two thoughts in before we move to the moderated panel discussion. And anybody with a strong response to what Lauren has said about the need for youth to be properly and meaningfully engaged, not just given jobs or opportunities in some rural area or given some encouragement, a pep talk, but to actually be involved in design of policy early on, co-design. I'm interested that youth, I think 68 of the Food System Summit panels and discussions involved youth. I didn't know it was as many as that. So that's quite encouraging. Any initial thoughts or initial responses? If not, we're going to, yes, okay, please. Remind us who you are again.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Maybe a question about youth engagement from your perspective, and maybe during the dialogue of the FSS, was it difficult to get all the youth you wanted, also in terms of diversity, to get engaged? Did you have to look for them, or were they already there, or were they maybe willing to participate, but you didn't have a connection? Is there something to be worked on this topic? Thank you.
Participate in many of the dialogues. I listened into some dialogues that were organized, but I think that they were very variable depending on the country, on the structure of youth organizations, on the structure of the private sector and the public sector in the different countries. The good thing about the Food System Summit process is that it was very transparent and open, and a lot of the materials are online. So there's a sort of a repository of the outcomes of the dialogues that are available at the summit site. And I think that we saw that the priorities of groups were made in pathways. And so there's a process going on right now with the coalitions to see, right, where the focus on youth has been most strongly incorporated into the national pathways, because of course governments were dealing with lots of different priorities which came up through the dialogues. And I think there will be a strong process of ensuring that the support matches to see where the participation was strongest. If any of my colleagues also want to come in on this, they're more than welcome to come in on the answer as well.
Tremendous. Okay, go for it. Go to me.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think she's made quite interesting points about young people getting involved in policy making. I've been attending a lot of meetings around for young people, and this conversation has been there for decades. But I think at this point we need to ask important questions, because if we're having the conversation of bringing young people on board in the policy making process, and the demography shows that we're not making progress, really. So what is happening? You know, for us to get a different result, we have to think differently and act differently. So it's one thing to have young people in the policy making, you bring them to the table. Why you're doing that is you want to ensure you have a youth-oriented policy, a policy that is accepted, a policy that reflects the reality of young people, a policy that reflects the problems, you know, the challenges and how they're going to be solved. But I think where we're missing out also is the implementation. So you make all those policies, and then when it comes to implementation, no young people is there. You see the problem? It's good we are in this room as a young person. It feels great. But when it comes to implementation, you don't see any young people there.
Pause for a second, because I'm going to come to you in earnest. But we have, and this is one of the great things about this session, is genuinely hybrid. So we're not just taking Q&A, just written questions from people. We have live questions on Zoom, and I can see a gentleman who's holding his finger over his lips. He knows now we can see him, and he's now grinning bashfully. His name is Thomas Tishar, youth advisor in food systems, and he's got a question, I believe, toward Lauren. Thomas, please ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can, very, very clearly.
Great. So the question is that from the research that we do also at Wageningen, but I think is more broad, is that even if you skill up young people to completely fit the agri-food markets. Only about a quarter of the people that enter the labor market every year, of about the 11.5 million coming into the African market every year, would actually be able to fill a vacancy. So about 3/4, there just aren't jobs. So population growth is faster than economic growth in Africa at the moment. So for me, it's always a bit confusing when we don't explicitly differentiate between entrepreneurship and employment. And so what I'd love to hear is how are specifically the different donor platforms and multilaterals in this discussion focusing on entrepreneurship. And what I mean by that is skilling up, not just technically, but also on business skills and life and organizational skills. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Thomas. Before you come back to it, Lauren, let's go to the second question. I think we have a second person who had a yellow hand up, and if we can take that question now as well, that would be very, very helpful. And then Lauren can handle that bouquet of questions. Because Lauren, it's still your time, even though Rotimi got involved, but that's fine. It's still Lauren's time at this point. Can we have that second questioner, please, if he or she is live? If not, we'll let Lauren answer Thomas's question. Okay, Lauren, would you like to respond? I mean, that interesting split between entrepreneurship and employment, because only 25% of these people who are being upskilled, given the tools, are actually finding gainful work.
Yeah. I think it's an important distinction, right? Because the two things are sort of driven by separate processes. So in order to create enough new jobs for the number of young people that are entering the job market, as our colleague was mentioning, right, we need processes of economic growth and of rural transformation, which are broader than just a focus on training young people, right? We don't want to train young people to go into a job market which is stagnant or an economy which is stagnant. And that's why I think it's important to keep youth at the center of a broad set of policy discussions, right? Also around processes of changing agri-food systems, right? An increasing number of young people will be looking for jobs, maybe not as farmers, but within food systems, which are an increasing part of the employment process, part of the chain, right, in the countries that we're talking about. And so that's the sort of part of maybe not creating new jobs, but facilitating the entrance of young people into the job market. I think maybe perhaps there's been too much focus on the creation of new jobs and rather on the insertion of existing jobs or the expansion of parts of the chain into which people can participate. Then on the other hand, we have entrepreneurship, which requires a very different set of skills, right? It requires, as the colleague was mentioning, skills in terms of organization, skills in terms of managing finance and expectations of financiers, et cetera. And that presents another set of challenges for young people who, as we mentioned, don't always have access to finance or ways to access finance. But one thing that I learned over time by working with some colleagues on youth is that we shouldn't necessarily expect just because people are young that they are more likely to be entrepreneurial, right? Some of us are entrepreneurial and some of us are not, right? But those that are genuinely entrepreneurial do need the kinds of skills that he was mentioning, which go beyond the sort of technical skills to do a job, but rather about writing business plans, how to talk to investors, how to understand the policy process and the way that it works, how to be an employer, not just an employee, right? How do you manage a team, et cetera. So I think that what donors need to do probably breaks into like those two broad categories, but we have to keep in mind the broader processes of economic growth in which this context is situated.
Thanks very much, Lauren. I love it when you went through the list of qualities that a potential entrepreneur has or needs to have, whether they're young or not. And I saw Rotimi going like this, as in like, yeah, tick, got that, tick, got that. That describes your profile, which is why you're smiling so broadly. Okay, so we're now going to focus on a couple of panelists to get the youth perspective. One of them is on the line. I mentioned him earlier. So Tumibazi Kamutima, who is the CEO of the Young Farmers Champions Network. So let's get a visual of him. And we see Rotimi Opayemi Olawale, founder and CEO of JR Farms Limited. We're going to focus on the two of you for a moment to get your perspective. So Tumibazi in Uganda, just tell us, you can respond if you want briefly to what Lauren said. And then I also want to ask you how you've been affected, you and some of the colleagues you're working with in the Young Farmers Champions Network, by the ongoing crisis, COVID, which is still there, and the war in Ukraine vis-a-vis international food commodity prices, climate change, all these things coming together. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you, Henry.
Hey.
I want to first agree that to be an entrepreneur, you actually need more attention because it needs a lot of things to do, like our colleague said, for you to really be able to take your business to the next level. Let me go straight to your question. The crisis has brought a lot of disruptive approaches. It has made us think much because you realize this is something most of us were not ready for. It just came, and for example, you realize during that time, the funding of projects reduced, and most organizations were pushed to lay off staff, and of course these are jobs being lost. You also realize that going to the real youth entrepreneurs, the farmers, you realize that they also were affected in terms of access to farm inputs because most countries, including Uganda, went into a number of lockdowns, and movement of farm inputs from one place to another were a challenge. And this, of course, delayed in terms of planting, and of course, which affects the whole cycle of the food value chain. You also realize that not only inputs, but also people could not find markets for the outputs for their products. And this is because of the same reasons. Products were finding it hard to move from one place to another. And also, of course, the people did not have the purchasing capacity, the purchasing power. They were resorting to other alternative options of survival. And so accessing markets was a better challenge. And looking at the current issues, I mean the current crisis in Ukraine, currently the prices of fuel have skyrocketed in Uganda, and I believe all over the world. And this is what facilitates the value chain, products moving from one place to another, from rural communities to urban centers. And this has led to the skyrocketing of food prices and even the prices of other commodities. So, of course, now the people are starting to reduce on the rations of food they eat. Sometimes they eat lunch and don't eat supper so that they can make ends meet. And of course, all this in the end affects the entrepreneur whose business is surviving on these consumers. So this crisis is actually causing a lot of pain, and we believe it will be over soon, and the prices of fuel will settle down so that business can run as usual. Currently, COVID has reduced and people are now starting to get to work, but now the crisis in Ukraine has also brought in another challenge. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tumibazi, for that initial response. But here we are at the Global Donor Platform. We're meeting together and we're focusing on what can be done to assist, and we want to unleash all that potential among the young people, land, employment, the whole range of things we're discussing today. What do the young farmers that you represent, what do you yourself as a young farmer actually need then in order to do your job more effectively, to get back in business? What do you need from government, from business community, from donors?
Yes, thank you so much, Henry. One, I have to say that it is time to disrupt the policies that exist and try to look for policies that fit young people. For example, I want to use this opportunity to appreciate the efforts of FAO here in Uganda. For example, we happened to be part of a program called AGA, which supported the development of the national strategy for youth employment in agriculture here. And this strategy has laid out areas, the programs on which the government can support young people, for them to be able to access financing, to access capacity in terms of agronomy and in terms of business development. And this is really helping. And through this, we managed to identify over 1,000 youth champions all over the country. These are young people who are showing other youth in rural communities that things can be done, who have overcome the challenges and being able to show that, yes, you can do something in agribusiness. Yes, so I believe we need to look for policies. Government need to design policies where youth are involved, both in planning and execution. And I want to agree with my brother from JR Farms, who just said it does not have to only be involved at planning level, but also at execution. But not only that, I believe, looking, of course, I'm bringing Ugandan perspective, but I believe this is what is happening all over the world. Things like tax incentives at this point, we need to really, young people who are starting businesses, they need tax incentives so that they can settle and organize themselves and be able to come back from the effects of the crisis so that they can move. We need special financing, for example. Let me first say low interest rates. We need access to financing at low interest rates. For example, most Ugandan banks will give you up to 21% in terms of interest rate. This is still so high. However, there are initiatives like Uganda Development Bank giving at 10% to youth entrepreneurs. But of course, they need to also increase on the numbers they are able to give these resources. And also reduce on the requirements, because they are asking a lot, youth entrepreneurs, a lot of things, instead of also embedding capacity building in their program so that youth are able to qualify for these things. And when it comes to business community, I believe we need partnerships, we need markets, we need to work together as a business communities to support young people to thrive. Thank you, Henry.
Tremendous. Thank you very much again.
Yes, sorry, once a bit. Of donors. Yeah, I also believe that the donor community needs to invest much in funding so that these enterprises can come back to business, but also capacity building, because you can realize the points that are coming up, that capacity building is still key when it comes to young people, because to do business, you need business capacity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much again, Tumbazi. He's the CEO of the Young Farmers Champions Network in Uganda. And you mentioned your farming colleague, your brother here, Rotimi Opeyemi Olawale, the founder and CEO of JR Farms Limited. Now, Tumbazi, you look like a young farming champion, the way you're dressed, and I can see your logos. I'm going to say Rotimi looks more like a hedge fund manager than a young farmer. Maybe he can give you some financing. I'm jesting. I'm jesting. No. But Rotimi, good to see you. Very quickly, just introduce us. Tell us a bit about JR Farms Limited.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm Olawale Rotimi Opeyemi. Nigerian by origin. As young as you can see, I'll be 33 by July next month. Started the journey after my first degree in 2010. I started roughly around 2011. I grew up in an agrarian society or your town. So I grew up with agriculture as a passion. But my plan was to actually work with the UN, make a lot of money and come back to invest in agriculture.
Okay.
But that never happened.
Right, okay.
So of course we started with cassava value chain in Nigeria. Right now we have factories in cassava value chain. One for cassava flour and the other one for gari, which is a local staple consumed by over 180 million households in Nigeria. Also, it's a staple in West Africa. I know Ghana.
We eat gari. Too much gari.
So and then we moved to Rwanda in 2017 to work in the coffee value chain, which is a project supported by the government of Rwanda. Over the years, we've been exporting coffee from Rwanda to different countries. And interestingly, the biggest market for coffee is Africa, where we've done tons of coffee. What we saw in 2020, 2021, we increased our export by 200% over what we've done in the last 3 years. And largely Nigeria is the biggest market. We also ship to Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Senegal. a little bit to Egypt and also to Zambia. And then
no wonder you're looking so like this, isn't it? This is great. I mean, this is a fantastic story. You're not even 33 yet.
Yeah, but
keep going.
But then the challenges are there. You know, the success stories are good, but the challenges are very enormous.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, but then we're in Zambia also, where we just open a livestock feed factory.
Yeah.
And where we're using cassava peel as substitute for maize and it's a very interesting project because in Zambia, there's been, some of us may be familiar with Zambia as a country that's been facing a lot of fluctuating weather, a little bit of drought. And the staple is maize. So humans and animals have to compete for maize. So we are coming at the point where the prices of livestock feed in Zambia is jumping, you know, like an aircraft climbing into 38,000 feet. So we are coming with this innovation to use cassava peel. We're working with key stakeholders like Zambian breweries. I was in Zambia about 3 weeks ago, visiting farmers as far as 2,000 kilometers away from Lusaka. Cassava farmers, we're taking off those peel from them, process it, and we've done a lot of research and testing around this over the last couple of years together with CDI, that's IITA in Nigeria. We've done trainings around this and it's effective. So what we're doing is quite significant in Zambia because it's not only going to crash the price of feed, it's only also going to make the farmers more productive, bring the prices of protein down in Zambia. Together with this, we've developed an outgrower scheme, which we started last year. And I also met with the country rep of FAO in Zambia. She's also given our commitment to work with us. And right now we're developing a youth-based cassava outgrower scheme in Zambia.
Let me pause you for a second. Well, this is too much to take in. This is fantastic. I'm so happy. I'm sure the FAO people are also nodding in agreement, in approval. So I'm just wondering whether you're doing this, you're having all this success because of or in spite of the policy and business environment, you know, the policy framework, because we're here to see how the donor platform and colleagues and partners can make things even better for you and to really help those young people who need employment in the rural sector or whose entrepreneurial instincts can be unleashed. And I'm just wondering how conducive the policy framework and business environment for a young person like you, who's clearly doing very well, is at this point. How can it be improved?
Key to say is the policies are there, they will always be there.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say that there's nowhere in the world where you have perfect policies. There's always policy gaps, room for improvement. For my side, based on practical experiences from GR farms, I think on the policy side, I would rather look more at market integration in Africa.
Right.
That's the first thing. Because, for example, I've said this in many platforms, as a Nigerian passport holder, I'm able to get a visa to EU so quickly than I'm able to get a visa to DRC, for example.
Wow.
And it's even cheaper for me to get an EU visa or American visa than it is for me to get a single entry to Congo.
Hang on, you find it easier to get into the EU than you have to get into DR Congo?
Yeah, because for you to get into DR Congo, you have to pay around $150, I think, for a single entry visa. So I think there's a need to first work on the market integration. That's very key. Also, in the area of, Lauren talked about the models of creating employment. Not necessarily have to create new jobs. Also, new jobs can be created by consolidating existing one. For example, GR farms, I wouldn't say, of course, we're not a small business anymore. So we are hoping to work with partners to consolidate and create jobs. For example, Rahul is here, we're working with IFAD, for example, to absorb trained youth from IFAD, to employ them. We are able to do that, provided they meet up with our standard. So we can work with partners in this area to train young people, to employ them into our system, and also they gain more exposure through working with us. And in the future, they can go and start their business. Not every young person will be an entrepreneur. I think we need to say that. You know, so some of them will be made by working for organizations. You know, I tell our team, for example, in GR farms, like I said, you guys are enjoying. You don't have a feel of what it looks like to be a CEO. Because you guys just work and then at the end of the month you get paid. For me, I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking of that.
Yeah, but well, they don't wear these suits like you're wearing.
They even wear more expensive
ones. They don't come to Rome.
they wear more expensive ones than I do.
So they're getting good money and good careers.
Yeah, so in JR Farms, I would say, and I can confidently say this, that we are one of the good paying medium scale business.
Right.
Because I know even for some big organizations in Nigeria, where I'm coming from, they don't pay what we pay.
Fantastic.
So
right.
for me, and I'm proud to say that also, that we give a lot of social security for our staff. Yeah, so
this is great. I'm gonna stop you now, Olawale. I mean, I know you're into your groove, and I could listen to you all morning. However, we want to move on from the youth perspective to the country policy perspective. You've mentioned a number of countries, including Nigeria and Zambia, etc. But we're going to drill down more into Madagascar. And we were due to be joined by Madam Lova Manjaka Rakotoson, who's head of the Rural and Training and Agricultural Extension Department. She's part of a directorate for support to producers and agribusiness in Madagascar. She's unable to join. In fact, she's on a food security mission, emergency mission in rural Madagascar, and she can't join us online. However, I'm delighted that Elisanda Puertas, who is ILO Rural Economy Specialist here, she's going to jump in and deliver the prepared remarks. Elisanda, are you with us? Please do. Are you mic'd up? Fantastic. And I can see you were born to do this from the way you're entering the stage, the level of swagger that you have. Fantastic. But this is important. We want to try and get the country policy perspective, what the context, the strategies, and how we've adapted since the UN Food Systems Summit that we've all been referencing from September last year. So yes, please deliver the remarks then.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to me to read what she has shared with us. So I hope it provides a bit of an overview of what they are trying to do in Madagascar. So there I go.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for us, the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock of Madagascar, to be able to share with you our policy and initiatives that relate to the creation of decent employment opportunities for rural youth. Our policy for the development of the agricultural sector advocates food self-sufficiency and sustainable management of natural resources, an approach that reconciles environmental causes, sustainable farming, and access to decent work for all in the face of alarming climate and geopolitical changes that threaten the lives and livelihoods of communities. In this perspective, the strategic orientation of the Malagasy government through the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock is, on the one hand, to support family farming through the organization and professionalization of producers, and on the other hand, to promote agribusiness by encouraging the national and international private sector to invest on a large scale in the country. To do this, specifically in terms of creating job opportunities for rural youth, the ministry, together with various technical and financial partners, is proceeding with some initiatives. First, the development of agricultural vocational training. The ministry has trainings to prepare new generations of farmer entrepreneurs and young agricultural technicians with support mechanisms for professional integration and post-training support. Development projects such as FormaProd, financed by IFAD, provide training mainly for rural youth who have dropped out of school with post-training support for the startup of their professional projects. In addition to technical training, entrepreneurship training is provided systematically. Second, promoting youth entrepreneurship through the implementation of development projects on incubation of young agripreneurs, such as the program funded by the African Development Bank, facilitating access to funding for youth projects, such as the Fihariana project in Madagascar, and facilitating access to land by granting titles for youth people with agricultural projects, such as the Presidential Green Title Project. Third, the development of promising value chains, such as the vanilla one. One of the initiatives in this value chain is the development of training tools for quality production, while ensuring the sustainable management of natural resources and resilience to climate change. Young vanilla producers and processors are trained by the ministry in their centers, and they are provided also support to start up their own operations. And last but not least, fourth, the development of agricultural financing mechanisms at the regional level. The young people trained can benefit from state funding via a scheme to start their production activities. At the policy level, the ministry is strongly involved in establishing a political, legal, and institutional environment favorable to the professionalization of producers, including youth, the improvement of infrastructure and facilities, and increasing as well the productivity by taking into account climate change, sustainability of natural resources, and market requirements, as well as the improvement of agricultural services, allowing access to financing, land, training, market, and support for getting organized along value chains. These different initiatives contribute to the professionalization of rural youth in the agricultural sector and help facilitate their access to employment. Many steps have been taken, but much remains to be done, which requires the support of everyone. Together, we can build our resilience to the various environmental, economic, and geopolitical hazards at the global level. The ministry is currently organizing a national conference for food self-sufficiency under the title Accelerating the Reform for Food Self-Sufficiency in Madagascar. This conference will be held from 16 to 18 June in Antananarivo, Madagascar. Many courses of action will emerge after this conference, and the implementation of this action requires the development of partnerships with different actors. We thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to share our initiatives in terms of creating employment opportunities for rural youth at this annual General Assembly. Thank you for your attention, and we wish you a successful meeting. We remain at your disposal for further contributions to rural development.
Alessandra, thank you very much indeed for delivering those remarks on behalf of Madam Rakutolson, who is on her mission in rural Madagascar. Very interesting to get the perspective of a country like Madagascar that is under some pressure. I'm just wondering, Lauren, do you have any quick thoughts or any quick response to that country profile? I found that kind of interesting challenge, and obviously were Madam Rakutolson here, we'd be able to kind of ask her a few more questions. Any quick response to that?
I was interested in the statement, especially the focus on decent rural employment. Yeah. I think that that's really important, and something maybe I didn't say enough in my opening remarks. But I think also you were mentioning having opportunities for young people to participate in high quality jobs with high levels of social protection, to avoid, of course, the participation of children in agricultural value chains. We know that 70% of child labor is in the ag sector globally. And so, ensuring that there are good standards, that young people are not only trained and well remunerated, but that they don't work in hazardous conditions, and that there's no, sort of child labor exploitation in value chains is important. I think that came out in some of the things that were in the statement. And also, I think maybe something that we haven't really mentioned, but we should, is including young people also means having a sort of an approach which includes young women. Yeah. That we work towards having a sort of gender equality, and also other young people who may be more marginalized. So this could be people from indigenous groups or people who are disabled. Ensuring that the approaches are both focused on decent employment, but also being as inclusive as possible to the various groups involved. Yeah,
so there are no blind spots. Alessandra, have you been down to Madagascar and seen some of this for yourself?
Not yet.
You haven't, but that's something you're planning to do.
That's one of my next.
Tremendous. Okay, yes. So we're going to pull back even further and go from the country perspective to the continental perspective. And I'm pleased to say we have on the line Mr. Kennedy Mukulia Ayason, should I say, who's a policy officer at the Rural Development Division at the African Union Commission. I can see the AU Commission headquarters, which I visited myself once or twice in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and he's also specialist in rural economy, rural development, blue economy, and sustainable development. Kennedy, hello, give us a wave.
Hello, thank you so much.
Tremendous. Okay, my opening question to you really is on this, and I think Thomas, our online questioner, was talking about the number of people entering the job market every year and the low percentage of them who are actually gainfully employed within the first year or so. So the question is, what is the AU going to do differently to make sure the agricultural sector provides a significant number of jobs? And we're thinking about an African agribusiness youth strategy, but what's going to happen meaningfully, both at the national level and, you know, when it gets to the on the ground to the young people who need more than training and qualifications, they need the work.
Yeah, thank you so much. The African Union Commission, of course, is a continental body of the African continent in terms of driving policies and frameworks that facilitates our member states in undertaking activities that relates to the development of the African continent. And you're all aware that the African Union Development Agenda acknowledges that youth employment and self-employment is very key. And for that case, and we realize that there is always challenge in terms of youth employment, considering that we have a number of youth that enter into the job market every year, and those jobs are not available. So what do? We look at where the continent is at a comparative advantage, and that is the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector plays a bigger role. We have developed several frameworks. An example of it is the African Agricultural Development Plan, the CADAP, and its momentum framework that is from 2014 to 2025. And this has made several commitments in terms of creating job opportunities for the youth. And it has a target of at least 30% of youth getting employed in the agriculture sector, and especially in agricultural value chains. Equally, we needed to support and facilitate what we call preferential entry and participation of women and youth in gainful and attractive agribusiness opportunities. That led us to the development of the African Agribusiness Youth Strategy, where we are looking at how do now the African youth who are entering daily every year into the market get into the job market, especially in the agriculture sector. And then we were looking at the African Continental Free Trade Area that offers an enormous opportunity for the Africans, and especially in the agribusiness sector. That's when we developed the Agribusiness Youth Strategy, taking into consideration the framework for boosting intra-Africa trade in agricultural commodities. This is the biggest market. This is the biggest free trade area that is existing currently. So with that, we looked at what policies do we do for us in order for the youth to enter into the job market preferentially, and equally have a gainful, attractive agribusiness opportunities. And with this, that made us to develop the strategy. And in this strategy, we are asking our member states that when developing any other youth related investment plans, you must make sure that the youth are integrated in the country investment plans. And that's why we are integrating the youth component in what we call the National Agriculture Investment Plans. That is one of the things we are doing. We are working together with our regional economic communities to making sure that agriculture research and development facilitate what we call access to innovative and affordable technologies. We are looking at digital agriculture that is currently becoming what the world wants. And with that, we are looking at how the African youth can take advantage of the technology that is currently and the innovation to making sure that they are able to propagate it and make sure that agriculture become an attractive business for them to enter into and take into advantage again the continental free trade area. We are also we have a program called Retiring the Hoe to the Museum. This is meant to make sure that we have good mechanization of the agriculture sector. This in turn will attract the youth to the agriculture sector, and that will create in more jobs for the youth. And that's what the continent is doing. Of course, we are working with the African Union Development Agency, that is what we call AUDA, the AUDA NEPAT, to make sure that the implementation of this strategy is taken into consideration. Equally, we are looking at how to create awareness on emerging agribusiness opportunities that exist on the continent. And this we are doing together with the regional economic communities, with our member states, to making sure that if those emerging agribusiness opportunities come in, definitely they should be able to work with the banks, financial institutions, the private sector, so that youth are given an advantage in access to financing, access to capital, and that there should be a way where the youth are given, for instance, we are looking at a mechanism of of having to mobilize resources at the national level, equal at the regional level, to make sure that there is subsidies given to young entrepreneurs and farmers of the African continent. This, in one way,
it sounds like your
them
department is very, very busy, and you've got an awful lot on the agenda, which is very, very positive. I was going to ask you a brief follow-up question, but rather than I asking you one, I've got a young farmer here, successful, founder and CEO of JR Farms Limited, based in Rwanda. And I thought he should ask you a follow-up question, because you've been scribbling away, Olawale, very diligently. And you did talk about the frustrations of moving from one African country to another as a young entrepreneur, as a farmer. Easier to get to the EU with all its walls and barriers than it is to go across to DR Congo. You have a quick question for Kennedy.
Not necessarily a question, but I think maybe a charge for Kennedy and maybe the AU to look into the reality of implementation, because on ground, it's totally different. Yeah. For example, crossing the border, even West Africa, I have to pay across the borders. I've gone from Lagos to Ivory Coast by road 3 times. Every point I got to, from Lagos to Seme border, to Ilakonji, to Aflau, down to Elubo, between Ghana and Ivory Coast, I have to pay at every point, even though I carry the West African passport. This should not be.
And you have ECOWAS, free movement of goods, services, capital, and people.
Exactly. So on paper, they tell you it's free movement. Once, for example, landing in Liberia, I don't need to be questioned because I'm within the ECOWAS region.
Yeah.
Then they ask you what's your invitation, and then they start to question.
Let's put that straight to Kennedy, because one of the things I saw, living in the UK when the UK was a member of the European Union, the dynamism among youth, not just in farming, but a whole range of entrepreneurial activities, or just seeking employment, whether in agriculture, and huge numbers of people from Eastern Europe came to the UK, for example, to work in agriculture. It was amazing because of the free movement of goods, services, people, and capital. And it's great to have the African Continental Free Trade Area, in principle, based, I believe, in Accra. And you've talked very positively about it, but as we've heard just now from Olawale, implementation is a problem, and it's frustrating and stifling the youth when it comes to employment in agriculture and in other things. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, thank you. We do understand all these situations, especially when it comes to the movement of persons and services, including goods, across the continent. The 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063 that will end this year will take into consideration the review of how much have we achieved on those projects and flagship projects that the African continent has, the heads of states endorsed 10 years ago. And we are looking at the African passport. Currently, a lot of dialogues have been taking place to ensure that we have our member states all issue the African passport to allow citizens of the African continent to move freely. And this is one of the agenda in the review of the 10-year implementation plan that ends this year. As we get into next year, developing the new plan, we will be taking into consideration how much have we achieved and how far should we be able to promote the free African passport that will allow persons and services to move across the continent. And equally into that, is that we are tapping onto, in most cases, the African Continental Free Trade Area in terms of developing the rules of origin. And this will already, there are a lot of dialogues taking place and a lot of work has been done. In the short run, of course, this might be a problem, but we expect that with commitment from our heads of states and reminding them the fact that this is a commitment of the African heads of state, and that they should be able to implement this at their various countries. And this
very good. Kennedy Muklia Ayason from the African Union Commission's Department of Agriculture. Thank you very much indeed. Let's scale further back to a multilateral organization. We have another contributor, a colleague from the ILO, a rural economy specialist, Mr. Elvis Bayutalev, who is going to join us now. And Elvis, let's see if we can see you, because I want to ask you a couple of questions here. There you are. Good. So the Coalition of Action on Decent Work and Living incomes and wages for all food systems workers. I mean, that, I'm just wondering how far it advances equitable livelihoods within the agri-food sector, because of course it was a key commitment, and well, it's founded essentially by the UN Food System Summit. So what's it like in practice? How far is it advanced equitable livelihoods within the agri-food sector? Because we know people can be notoriously badly paid.
It's not only, thank you, it's not only really about the payments, you know, but when,
Yes,
of course, you know, when it comes to agriculture, the strange thing is that, you know, while feeding the world, these people quite often are among the most food insecure, the high incidence of working poverty, lack of labor and social protection. We have actually 2/3 of extreme poor globally who are engaged in agriculture. As Lauren mentioned earlier, child labor, 70% of all child labor is in agriculture. So it is more about working conditions in general. And it's clear that without addressing this, what we call decent work deficits, it will be impossible to build equitable livelihoods and food systems. So the coalition has 4 priorities, 4 major priorities. These are promoting labor and human rights, advancing opportunities for decent and productive employment within the agri-food sector, strengthening organization and social dialogue in the sector, thereby ensuring that sector workforce has a voice in policies that impacts their work and life, and improving incomes and wages. What we do in practice, I should mention, of course, we target the most vulnerable. These are smallholders, youth, women, indigenous people, migrant workers. And in practice, as a coalition, we have a wealth of experience. And what we are trying to do, we are pulling this expertise and experience together, and we are helping countries to effectively diagnose and address this employment and labor issues within their food systems. This includes, you know, sharing good practices, sharing our tools, approaches, helping them develop and implement the right policies, and of course, you know, also conducting some, you know, concrete interventions on the ground. So this is in short a bit about the work of the coalition.
Tremendous. And how do you plan to address and factor in the effects of the current crisis? Because obviously we've got these shocks, you know, pandemics, war, movement of people. And at the same time, while all this is happening, we want to drive forward food systems transformation. Can it be done?
Well, it can be done if we focus on the right things. So just as a reminder, the coalition was born during the COVID crisis. And this, of course, the crisis had a major impact on the world of work, a devastating impact. And today we face multiple and interconnected crises, which are aggravated, of course, by the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And this is causing, of course, a marked deterioration in the labor market recovery. So, of course, you know, inequalities within countries and between countries are increasing. But as is the case with, in the pandemic, you know, the most vulnerable are at greater risk. And then, you know, looking at the priorities that I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, I can say that, you know, the same priorities remain timely and valid, if not more relevant. And just to give you an example, when we speak about labor rights, we strongly believe that, especially at a time of crisis, we cannot cut corners on labor rights, because these are the issues that labor rights provide a strong framework to, you know, to address some of the major problems facing the countries. And the same, you know, social dialogue. Again, it can help us to reach fair and equitable solutions. And, you know, as many of the speakers today mentioned, also it's important that in all this kind of processes, we have youth participating, and that the voice of the workers is actually heard in these processes. Equally, you know, promoting quality employment, entrepreneurship within the food systems is still, you know, a very much valid kind of objective.
Elvis Beitulayev from ILO, thank you very much for now for that contribution to responding to those questions. Let's stay with some of the themes you raised there, Elvis, because Molly Brennan is here. Sorry, Molly, last but definitely not least at all, as they say in Accra, at all. Okay, because you are lead consultant in the Coalition of Action on Decent Work and Living Incomes and Wages for All Food Systems Workers, as Elvis was referring to, at IFAD. I'm just wondering where we are and what is the current status and what are the planned next steps?
And thanks, Elvis, for that overview. So for a bit on the coalition, just so for those that don't know about it, it's led by IFAD, ILO and CARE. So we're working closely together, and at the minute the coalition is active.
Yep.
We're working on a 2-year work plan, which we're finalising with a number of stakeholders, which we're meeting on a regular basis with. And largely we're continuing to work better to inform, engage and mobilise our partners, but also commitments on the decent work agenda. And we do welcome anyone or any partner that wants to kind of join us in the coalition to kind of move towards that. I think it's important to say that the work we want to do is going to be led by member states. We want it to be demand driven. So we're really looking for member states to work with, of whom we can sort of make progress on the ground with. And needless to say, I think there's a lot of work going on at ILO, at CARE, at IFAD on these issues already. It's not a new issue,
yeah.
But we're really hoping to build on the collective mandates of each of these organisations to make real progress with member states. And that includes looking at creating and implementing policies on agribusiness, which really focus on employment and labour issues. Creating decent employment for the most vulnerable, and particularly looking at youth in that as well. Mm-hmm. And finally, taking a real systems approach to food systems transformation. So linking up the agriculture and the labour ministries, which often aren't in communication on these issues.
Mm-hmm. Now, how closely are you aligning with the national pathways? Because it can't be an afterthought. This is central, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's at the centre of what we want to do, and that's the overall goal, is to ensure that the national policies for member states integrate decent work into their agri-food policies. So the real immediate focus is on the national pathways. And what we're doing at the minute is, we did an initial scanning of all of the national pathways. There's over 100 of them to work out where the decent work angles lie. We're now in the process of engaging with different member states who have chosen to focus on decent work. But moving forward, we're really hoping to, even member states that actually are in an earlier stage of forming their national pathway, to work with them if they want to kind of utilise the expertise of the coalition as they're forming the national pathway. So we're really looking to get involved at sort of all angles. But I think in terms of engaging with the national pathways, it really is an iterative process, and we're trying to take a broad approach at the minute to see where we can really link in and actually make a difference.
Tremendous, Molly. Thank you very much. So we've heard from our 6 speakers, both virtual and in person. A number of questions stroke comments have come in online via the chat, and thank you very much for being so active there. And this one is from one of our speakers yesterday from Yemen, from Karima Al-Hadar. And she's saying, look, young people in fragile and conflict settings need support. They're a vital game changer agent. They can transform systems through diversified practices. They can be innovatively responsive to the emerging challenges. That was a comment. And then one from Kip Rono, who says, I remember the Ronos were great runners from Kenya back in the 70s and 80s, just giving my age away and my love of athletics. And then we have this comment from Kip Rono saying, the topic of discussion is timely. Agri-food systems offer more opportunities than any other sector. There's a need to channel more investment, persuade government to increase budgetary allocations to agriculture, and put in place sound policy interventions. In Kenya, youth unemployment indices are at their highest. There's a need to craft our curriculum to be market-oriented so that we can create job creators instead of job seekers. Interesting point there. And then Dr. Namukolo Kovic, who we heard from yesterday, who's active on the chat again today. Fantastic, Doctor. Getting to profitable economies of scale in agriculture and food systems comes with greater mechanization and related, and you were talking about this, Rotimi, and related reduction in the number of employees needed. How is this featuring into the discourse of getting the youth meaningfully integrated into food systems? How do we ensure that the youth will actually be interested in careers in agriculture and food systems have not been, as this has not been the trend anywhere in the world? Interesting. Who would like to take that on, that question from Dr. Namukolo Kovic? You think, okay.
I think differently because I think right now.
What's different about you?
What?
I said, what is different about you? Because Dr. Kovic is worried that we are trying to reverse a worldwide trend. Around the world, youth do not appear to be that interested in careers in agriculture and food systems. So if we manage to reverse it, we are really bucking a trend.
No, I think youth are interested in agriculture, at least from what I see on the continent in Africa. And what we see now is young people even proud themselves to be farmers. It is not what we grew up knowing, you know. Young people run away from farming, but today you see on Twitter and Facebook, people even put on their profile, I'm a farmer, I'm this. So I think it's changing. And then with the technology in agriculture, you can be a farmer without necessarily going in the bush. You can have a greenhouse, you can do hydroponics, aquaponics. So things are changing. I think personally, from my experience, and also, of course, what we see in trends, young people getting more interested in agriculture. And more also with a lot of success stories among young people, they're getting more inspired that if he or she can do it as a young person, then I can also be better in agribusiness. Right. So I think it's
fantastic. Let's go to another young contributor, a colleague, Tumibazi, who is in Uganda. Your response to that challenge, really, from Dr. Kovic, who says that the youth don't appear to be that interested in careers in agriculture pretty much anywhere in the world. So Tumibazi, you have bucked that trend personally in Uganda, and you represent a lot of young farmers. So please explain, how do you get young people meaningfully integrated into food systems and ensure that they will be interested in these careers?
Yes, thank you so much. I have faced that question many times, and my response has always been this. We just have to find ways of making agriculture profitable, making agriculture more of a business to the young people, because you find that young people are doing more dirtier jobs, I may say, than agriculture, which they used to say young people are shunning agriculture because it's dirty and all that stuff. So it is not true. Young people are not shunning agriculture. When you come here, you realize that the rate of young people leaving agriculture is also high. And this is because they are faced with challenges which they have failed to address. And for example, you do tomatoes, and during the harvest time, you are getting low prices, and you find the investment you put is even much higher than the money you are getting out. So it is not easy to convince such a young farmer to remain doing tomatoes. But again, we needed to develop business models for young people which can help them gain free benefit from agriculture. And by doing so, young people will come. And I want to agree with my colleague from JARA Farms. This trend is changing because of different efforts from different players. Young people are starting to appreciate agriculture because they are finding it profitable, unlike before when they used to find it unprofitable. So let's unite, work together, create business models that can help young people engage into agriculture as a business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very robust response there, Tumibazi. But Elisenda, isn't the problem, you're looking at me with alarm, but that's fine, let's work with your alarm, that whereas when they see city centers, glittering buildings, high finance banking, all these other areas, they see potential careers lasting 30 years, they see finance, they see a career path. When they look at the rural economy, they think poverty, they think exploitation, they think this is what my parents used to do and they're still poor, why should I do it?
Well, I would follow what young...
Don't look at him, he's destroyed my argument, don't look at him.
No, but I think that they have set a path towards a changing image of rural areas. much needs to be done. So I think it's the further step as we continue this discussion. And there is a whole stream of discussions and literature and policies on how to make rural areas attractive as places to live and to work. And in particular in Africa, there's a discussion about how the urbanization is advancing, and there is a role. We think always of urbanization of these big towns and mega cities, but there are also rural towns and middle-sized towns that can play a key role in making surrounding rural areas more dynamic and therefore attractive to the younger generations to make their lives. But investments are needed to make infrastructure work, to ensure connectivity, to ensure that there are facilities and services, that there is cultural life and this dynamism that young people appreciate.
Thank you for that. Molly, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said really, but I think there is an angle on sort of knowledge sharing and technology and just making sure that's really accessible to youth. Because I think just so there is a career there and that you have access to it and that you can be successful, there needs to be sort of platforms in place that can facilitate that distribution of knowledge and technology.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's spend a couple of minutes maybe with a question or comment from here in the room. Hopefully you've been, yes, sir. Please tell us who you are as well.
Thank you, Christo, WFP.
Yes.
But for matters of full disclosure,
also, are you a farmer?
Well, I'm a farmer, but I'm also, I'm a farmer, not a food producer, but a producer of rubber and oil palm.
Wow.
But much perhaps related to that, a former Minister of Agriculture in Liberia.
Yes.
Two things. One, I fully agree that the issue is not that young people are not interested in agriculture. I think the issue is that we have not made the right investments in agriculture to go along with the comment it made that makes agriculture into a business, makes it profitable. If you are not investing in feeder roads, if you are not investing in electricity, then it becomes difficult for anyone to invest. If you don't have institutions that ensure that credit is available at rates that are reasonable, then you're going to have problems. But I think also beyond doing these things, young people have to take political power.
Mm-hmm.
Decisions that are made in terms of where countries are heading are made at a political level. I think it is important. All of what we have said here is good.
Mm-hmm.
What needs to be done to increase employment, what needs to be done. But unless young people get interested in politics or support those politicians who they believe would be able to serve their ambitions and their needs, I think this is going to be a lot. So finally, the other point is not only young people that are not interested in agriculture or may not be, or that need to be helped, even the typical smallholder.
Yeah.
This is why they continue to produce at subsistence levels.
Yeah.
Why would you want to produce a surplus if you cannot get it to the market?
Yes.
Why would you want to do that if what you produce is going to spoil in less than 24 hours or in a week and you cannot sell it?
Yes.
Why? Why would you want to invest
Honourable
in
Minister, thank you. Well, let's leave that question. I mean, I can't answer it. It's a rhetorical question, but it's a meaningful question. I know Rotimi wants to answer, but I want to get one or two other points in as well from people who haven't perhaps spoken for a while or spoken before we move on to the closing part of this particular session. We're going to close at 12:30, and then we're going to have lunch, not down here, but upstairs, as in on the ground floor. It's still free. You'll be able to eat. You'll be well satisfied. And then we're going to have synthesizing a high-level session at 1:30 back here with some more heavyweight and powerful speakers both here and online. More details on that to follow in a moment. But further, yes, Madam, please tell us who you are as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm Ileana Grandelis from FAO. I'm a program officer working precisely on employment and the youth employment support. And I just wanted to add information about an ongoing process, which I think at the CFS level, the Committee on Work Food Security, which I think is already discussing many of these important entry points and areas in need of support. And the CFS is currently negotiating policy recommendations precisely in support of youth engagement and employment in agri-food systems. And the negotiations are ongoing. The first round has started, and the second one and last is going to be in the first week of July. And the objective is for the CFS to adopt policy recommendations, voluntary, of course, not binding, but agreed multilaterally by many CFS members in the October session of CFS. And just looking at that, while negotiations are still ongoing, what I think is really interesting to see is the 5 areas, let's say, prioritized by those CFS negotiations. And one is precisely the enabling environment needed for youth to thrive. And this, I think, goes back to what our colleague also from Liberia and the youth representatives today were reflecting on, and enabling a strong enabling environment in terms also of infrastructure participation. Meaningful participation is really at the core of the problem. Second is access to dignified, rewarding livelihoods. So again, a critical entry point on the profitability of the opportunities to be established. Third, equitable access on youth to resources, infrastructure, and markets. Again, mentioned over again. Yeah. Fourth, the 5 points. So the first is equitable access to knowledge, education, skills for youth. We heard today how capacity building is still at the core of the support need for young generations. And finally, foster inclusive innovations to promote food security and nutrition. So focus on innovation. And the role of youth as agents of change, I think, has been also mentioned today. This is a clear role, and the entire CFS process I think has really brought clearly into the discussion how youth have been seen for a long time only as beneficiaries. Yes. They're vulnerable. We discussed that today. Mm-hmm. They face vulnerability in the labor market, in the poverty, in terms of poverty. However, what is really important, and I think is coming more and more clearly, is the role of youth as innovators, as agents of change, as the people that are shaping the current food systems, and they will be key for the transformation of the system. So just a reminder on the CFS process, I think it's going to really be a really interesting process. And by October, we hope to have the policy recommendations endorsed by the CFS. Thank you.
Tremendous. We're just doing a very quick round of very brief closing thoughts. I'm just looking along the line here. Lauren, some closing thoughts, because we want to try to reach an endpoint here in order to relaunch some fresh thinking. What are your closing thoughts here?
Okay, I'd like to make sort of 2 closing points, building on what we've heard from others. No, the first is around what is the role of the public sector and what is the role of the private sector. Yeah. So agriculture is clearly a private sector business, right? We need to encourage the right enabling environment for the private sector to take off, for young people to participate in making farms businesses, as you've heard, right? And that means that the public sector's role is to facilitate the types of infrastructure the former minister was talking about, the colleague from WFP, to ensure that there's a good public education system, that there's social protection in place, that there's enabling policies, so that there are strategies for rural transformation processes to make rural places where people want to live, and also that businesses can flourish, right? So, and then the private sector, of course, has a totally different role, and they're going to be, generating jobs, creating the opportunities for young people to become parts of active value chains, facilitating access to information, et cetera. So I think it's important to keep in mind, right, that this is a private sector business that the public sector can facilitate and encourage by doing all sorts of its special roles. And the second thing is related to the policy framework, because I was really struck by what you said about the distance between strategies, guidelines, policies at the macro level, and then the gap with implementation. And so I think it's important to both encourage young people to participate in setting of what I would call national policies or strategies, right? There's been this massive increase over the past 20 years of the number of countries that have rural youth strategies or policies. But those policies, while fantastic because they set an ambition, they don't always translate into the types of business opportunities that the private sector needs. And so I think it's also important for young people to participate in the processes of unlocking what seem like smaller policy processes. So maybe it's regulatory issues, maybe it's issues of crossing borders, right? Maybe it's issues of specific sort of input subsidies or things that block the market for the particular product that people are working on. So I think beyond just participating at this sort of macro level on strategies and guidelines, it's really important to encourage young people and to make them aware of how to participate in processes on policies which will have a day-to-day impact on the products that they are growing, marketing, producing, et cetera.
Lauren, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A couple of very brief points. A couple of our colleagues who I know have one or two very pithy things to say. Conrad Ryan, you've been listening to this discussion. Your thoughts, because we need to try and move this forward now. We all know, and all these countries have got youth policies written into their frameworks. They claim to be doing and wanting to unleash the youth potential, but on the ground, and not a huge amount is happening. Your GDPRD board member and co-chair, your thoughts quickly.
Thanks a lot. First of all, many thanks for a very inspirational session. It's been really fantastic. I enjoyed it a lot. You are the future. Youth knows best what is needed, and youth has the potential to transform the food systems. And there are a few things I wish to highlight. First of all, as you may know, the platform has 3 thematic working groups on SDG 2, land and rural youth. And please do engage with the working group on youth. It is extremely active. And this brings me to my second point. We are also thinking, brainstorming a bit in the platform how we can better engage with youth. And one of the ideas we have is actually to showcase success stories like you, like we heard today. And I think this is really important. And also we need to, education is important, education about how you can access to capital, how we can de-risk your investments, the investments of entrepreneurs. And we also heard today, and I fully agree, this goes far beyond job creation, making agriculture sexy in rural areas. I mean, this goes really far beyond. And then a little bit of self-promotion for my second head, the European Commission. We actually posted the link to a study that was recently published by OECD and that we funded in the chat. Please have a look and let us know any feedback you have. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much indeed. Jim, have you got a couple of quick thoughts? Jim Woodhill, University of Oxford, advisor to the GDPRD and co-author of the stock taking report. You look surprised. Okay, don't worry, I'll move on.
Yeah.
Very quick thought. Yeah.
No, thanks. Super interesting and really critical discussion. So thanks for everybody that's contributed. Maybe just three points. One, I think it's really interesting to come back to IFAD Rural Development Report from last year. Put a lot of emphasis on the midstream, all of the activity happening between the farm gate and the consumption level. And around that, I think really 2 things to think about. One, how do you get food systems working in a way that does optimize good jobs for youth? But also, how do you make sure that you're actually using the food system to drive wider rural economic development, recognizing that we have to be realistic about the number of jobs that are going to be in the food system. And part of that is thinking about how do we make sure that all the profits out of food system work don't get sucked into urban areas, but actually are coming back into rural areas to drive that broader rural economic development. So I think there's a huge amount of data that we need to still get to understand what's happening in this midstream and how it can help to drive broader rural economic development, which comes to my second point. We really have to think about 2 overlapping circles. Youth, they're meeting their needs and engagement, but the enabling conditions for broader rural economic development. So, roads, infrastructure that benefit everybody is really critical for tackling the youth issue. So how do we bring those 2 circles of stuff together? And then the final point, I think, from an analytical perspective, is really understanding more deeply who are we talking about. I mean, let's not think about youth as a homogenous group. If you're a youth group living in a afflicted area, or a very marginal area, or if you're a disadvantaged youth or a youth with disabilities, you've got totally different needs. So let's really, from an analytical perspective, really get a much better understanding who we're talking about, where, and what that needs for the specific sort of support they need to be able to have a more active engagement in food systems.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Jim. I see Rahul is here. Rahul Antar is from the IFAD Youth Desk. You must be bursting to say something pithy at this stage or not?
Thanks, Harry. Just that your moderating skills are excellent.
Oh, thank you.
But what's even more excellent is the
now.
panel. And what was really amazing about this whole session is that it was so rich that it didn't just talk about the issues and challenges that young people face, but some real concrete solutions came out. I think some reflections to start, and given I've just followed Jim, I'd like to start where he stopped, actually, on the heterogeneity of youth, because this is an issue that we're also starting to experience. And you know, the more we start to focus our efforts on youth sensitivity within our programming, we start to say that our investment should really be responding to the needs of young people. And those needs of youth is a social construct. It's a transition of life. We've all been there. But, you know, sometimes that heterogeneity goes as far as even age bracket within youth. A 15 to 17-year-old will face very different challenges than an 18-plus-year-old. So they're the kind of things that we are starting to say that, you know, institutions and investment programs should really start to take into consideration. Some more reflections based on, you know, some of the broader...
You have to make one key reflection, because we're
one key. I'm going to make it into 1 minute of reflections. If that's
45
okay,
seconds.
But very, very quickly, just to say that I agree that if we're talking systems, we need to take a more systemic approach. And also some of, you know, the key arguments that came out, that we look at economic broader development and youth-focused investments. We have to find the balance between the two. And I suppose on the youth side, the focus on entrepreneurship should really also take into consideration what young people themselves are saying. You know, what about this market integration? What about capital? And of course, the things that we already know, like access to land, etc. I think we also heard on the focus on participation is equally important. So it's a lot more important, I guess, that investment programs started listening more to young people before just going ahead and also designing programs, which is something that even here in IFAD, we're starting to take more and more seriously. And we're trying to look at structured dialogues for how we can engage with youth. I think on the other side, it's also engaging with the enabling environment. And like Ola said, you know, he's a young CEO who's headed to a multi-million-dollar company. We need to start engaging with private sector actors as well, and trying to see what is really, you know, the friction and how can we oil it up in terms of making the connect in labor markets, which are sometimes saturated, but there might be room for young people to sort of get involved. How can we also look at job preservation, you know, particularly for those that are affected by certain crises? And I think that comes to a point of resilience as well. So I just feel like these are the kind of issues where we really need to like center a lot of our investments around. So I'm going to stop it there, Henry. I can see your pressure on me.
No, I was looking at you hard. Is Frank Bertelman here? We want to close. And where's Frank? Frank, we finished now. And you stand between us and the lunch, which, by the way, is not free. When I said free, I meant you're free to eat where you want, but it's not free. So it's on the ground floor, okay? So 1 floor above this. But I think you have got to take out some euros, okay? And but come back here, please, by 1:30 for our final session. Frank is co-chair of the GDPRD Thematic Working Group on Rural Youth Employment and the GIZ team leader of the global project on rural employment with a focus on youth. Frank, you need to land. Go for it.
Thanks a lot, Henry. And also, first of all, thanks a lot to all the panel. I think that was really great and engaging session. I also enjoyed it a lot. And yeah, just to sum up a few points from my perspective, I think what we ought, and also take it back to the whole AGA theme, what we have seen, the multiple crises, they really sum up risks also for youth. And usually they are the first ones to push it out of business opportunities. So I think to have a youth-specific lens and a focus in the agri-food system transformation is really key. That doesn't mean we should look at the youth employment issue as a standalone, but really to try to link it up to the overall food system transformation agenda. This is not an easy thing to do, but I think the national pathways can help a lot. They have to respond to even a more complex situation with the multiple crises. No, that doesn't make life easier, no, but I think it's the way to go. And I think we as a global donor platform, as a working group, can also try to better coordinate, to engage with all the partner countries, as well as the coalitions, the coordination hub, not to make that happen, at least for selected countries, not to try to build up a better coordination system and a better governance structure to try to link this youth employment and the overall food system transformation agenda. And yeah, I think that's still some work to do, but we are looking forward to engage with you in that. And thanks a lot again for everyone, and looking forward to our lunch and further discussions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to all the panel, both here and online. Lunch is served, one floor above us, and please back in here in time for 1:30 for that special session, building consensus and coordination on the current global crisis response initiatives, the potential role of donors, and the global donor platform for rural development. That's a special high-level session from 1:30. Thank you very much indeed.